My name is David Hernandez, and I'm a candidate for Lieutenant Governor of California, which means the entire state is the district. So anyone that you know in the state of California who is a registered voter believes that investing their vote in me would be to the benefit of the state, I'm asking you to let them know. You know, and it's great here to come in and meet some Facebook friends. It's different people I've seen at different meetings. And I want to thank this organization for this opportunity. My relationship with this organization goes back to the 2002 election. My wife, Debbie, was a member of the Encino Oaks, and they were making calls for President Bush. And at that time, I was just dropping her off to go visit with her Republican lady friends. I was an independent insurance adjuster for 25 years. I owned my own business for 10 years. I was an assistant coach on my daughter's softball team and my son's t-ball team. I had, you know, pets and plumbing and roofing and, you know, life. And so to get involved in politics, why would you bother, especially since those that got elected said they ran in order to serve us and look out for our interests. Boy, was I wrong. And so that's how I got associated with this organization, and what I heard from the very beginning was the 5 W's. And so for those of you that haven't heard that before, that's when women work, we win. That has been consistent since the first day I stood at a podium running for Congress in 2002, because no one in my district had run against Howard Berman in 10 years. There was no Republican on that ballot in 10 years. And as a businessman, I didn't think it made good sense to allow a candidate to win the day the filing period closes so that he can raise millions of dollars and send that to the DNC and use that to target competitive races, which has allowed the left to take over this state and almost allowed the left to take over this country. So I ran for Congress in 2002 and I never stopped. I was asked to run for Congress by the California Republican Party in 2004 and I never stopped. I was interviewed by the LA Times a couple of weeks ago and they said, David, you're that guy that runs for office all the time. And you're the, quote, perennial, unquote, candidate. Because how many times have you run? I said, well, let's see. I ran one time less than Abraham Lincoln and one time more than Richard Nixon. But funny, when it was all over, they were both called Mr. President. You know, you don't give up, you don't quit, you don't stop. And there's a reason for that. And I'll get to that very shortly. But a little bit about me. I'm from the land of Lincoln, which is Lincoln Heights, in the eastern part of Los Angeles. When I was 7, my family moved to North Hollywood. It was a tract home they bought for $13,000. You know, it was an open wash in the back. We had, anybody remember the incinerators that were out there in the backyard? And that's how I grew up. I went to the public schools when they were almost #1. I learned to drive when I was 16, you know, in the 1963 Mercury Comet, you know, with a stick shift 3 on the tree. Anybody learn to drive with a clutch? You know, you talk about how easy they have it today. So, but that's what I did. You know, I went to the local schools. I graduated from high school. It was 1967. The Vietnam War was taking place, and I went down to the recruiter and I joined the United States Navy. I spent 4 years in the Navy, 3 years working on a flight deck of aircraft carriers. First year off the coast of Vietnam, and then in the Mediterranean. Went all over the world, and I went into almost every country large enough for an aircraft carrier to pull in. And then I came back. I used a GI Bill. I bought a house in North Hollywood for $24,000 and raised a family, and never, ever thought about going into politics. But when I look back, and on my birth certificate, my father's occupation is listed as a banana loader because he unloaded freight cars at the produce mart downtown. But he went to school at night. You know, and it was much like Jack's story. He went to school at night and he got a job as a clerk at an insurance company. And when he retired, he was vice president of that insurance company. Now, and from there he started his own company. Now, yes, I'm proud of my father and what he did, but what I'm more proud of, and the reason that I'm running for this office, is because those inalienable rights that give us as Americans opportunities and possibilities that allow that to happen are under attack. And they are under attack at every single level by the left. You have many choices in this election. I don't even pay attention to the 6 Democrats that are running, but you have other Republicans that are running, fine people, very accomplished people. But what I want you to keep in the back of your mind, the lieutenant governor is one heartbeat away from the governor. This is not just a job interview. This is about preserving those inalienable rights that are under siege at every level. Make no mistake, at every level, especially within education, not only are our kids being indoctrinated, they are being turned against you. They are being turned against this country. They are being taught that free market capitalism is evil, and that socialism and communism that is responsible for the murder of over 25 million people in history is a better alternative. I'm sorry, but this is not the time for consensus building. This is not the time for compromising. This is not the time to go along to get along. This is not the time for Neville Chamberlain or Jimmy Carter. This is a time to stop the left, smash the left, and absolutely give no quarter as we go forward. What Invictus has done, they have targeted California because California represents the true threat to the left. When speaking to groups and on radio stations nationwide, what I tell them is that the United States owes California a debt of gratitude, because if it wasn't for the 330,000 Californians making calls into Michigan, into Ohio, into Pennsylvania, that Hillary Clinton would be president. It was the Californians that saved this country. And now it is time for the rest of the country to step forward and come to our aid, because we are not giving up. We haven't given up. The federated groups have remained loyal and dedicated and have worked and made those calls and walked those precincts in some of the very leanest years and bleakest years within our political history. And so, when I saw Kevin DeLeon talk about his relatives who were in the country illegally and had fraudulent identification, and talk about that is why SB 54 was needed, because most illegal aliens, and that's what they are, had fraudulent identification. And it was not a big deal to him. At that time, he had pulled papers to run for lieutenant governor. And so I waited to hear which Republicans were going to challenge him that were running for lieutenant governor. And I turned to my wife and said, you know, it looks like it's got to be me. Because I sat down with a mother, a single mother whose son was a good kid in Van Nuys, went to school, got good grades, did his homework, stayed out of gangs, didn't do drugs. Because of his good grades and her low income, he won a full scholarship to university. It was like you do the right thing and the right thing happens. And then she received a letter that the scholarship was rescinded because of the unreported income under her Social Security number. Don't tell me that identity theft does not have victims, that it's not a big deal. As far as the Dreamers go, I sat down with the father, and I'll wrap it up real quick. I sat down with the father from Panorama City, whose 19-year-old son had been a member of the LAPD Explorer program for 5 years. His whole future was ahead of him. All of his dreams were ahead of him, until he was shot and killed by a 15-year-old gang member who was in this country illegally. So, whenever we talk about reform, I always say victims first. You want to start manipulating the criminal courts, you want to start manipulating the prison system, what are the unintended consequences that are going to impact the victims. So my name is David Hernandez, and it would be my honor to serve as your Lieutenant Governor. Thank you.